let's talk about a few terms and terms which are related to experiences that kind of circle around surrender, and try to make some distinctions between acceptance, relaxation, submission, devotion, and surrender. Maybe these are kind of they're around the same. They're all playing in the same field, but they have different roles or different. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. So please lead us forward.
Okay. I'll try. Well, so to me, there is a passionate element to surrender, which distinguishes it from acceptance and relaxation.
Right.
So in that sense, it's a delicate thing, but I experience, when I think of surrender and the classical posture, of touching my forehead to the ground, there is an element of love and gratitude, and something comes out of me toward that to which I surrender without even knowing, it's not an object. I don't know if it's me or it or everything, but I'm not passively accepting reality or accepting God's grace. I am moving toward it in my surrender. So this is something that I realized as I read, I wrote a paper about surrender in general, and surrender to another person more specifically, and surrender to a spiritual master in particular as a specific case of that. And what struck me as I read different manifestations and expressions of surrender in different fields, the spiritual, in love, in sex, in the relation between therapist and patient, and leader and followers, etc., is that just as there is a desire, it's a profound, deep spiritual desire in each of us, I believe, to be free, which means to be who we are authentically, be a free agent in this world, and have a freedom of choice, and give our unique gifts as an individual, and bring that to fruition and express that in the world. So there is also another motivation or impulse in us, which seems to go in the opposite direction, which is to let go of that individuality and our uniqueness and a certain burden of existing as an individual in the world, and actually wanting to drop all that and be in the service of, and under the command, I don't know the expression, of something greater than us, of a greater power. And basically letting go of all of our personal agendas, fears and desires and longings, and just be in service of something else that takes over and guides us without us having any say in what we want and where to go.
Let me jump in for just a second,
Yes.
because I totally resonate with what you're saying, as long as that to which we are surrendering is understood to be greater or bigger or more expansive than us, as opposed to surrendering to, I don't know, a political ideology, or
a cult leader.
or a cult leader, or I mean, it can be very mundane sorts of things as well. So I'm understanding what you're saying about this, and I think you express it
Right.
beautifully. Is surrender to something greater than oneself.
Yes. Okay. One. This. Let's explore this together, because I think that because the longing to surrender has not been legitimized in our secular modern world, and
Sure.
has not been explored and looked at very deeply, we get more of the pathology of surrendering to a limited and distorted ideology or leader, which to me is distortion of the original authentic impulse to surrender.
Okay.
And I think as long as we don't make the distinctions such as the one you just made, we will continue to make those mistakes. And out of the impulse to surrender to something bigger and greater than our small self, we would take it in different directions that are not necessarily wholesome. So let's talk about the distinction between authentic, wholesome surrender to that which is greater than ourselves, and diverting it or distorting it and making it surrender to another expression of ego or another small self. That really leads to a lot of bad things in our world. So I try to do that. By making a distinction between surrender. These are just words, but let's see if that surrender on the one hand and submission and obedience on the other.
Mm-hmm.
And submission and obedience are like cheap imitations. I mean, they can look very, sparkly and powerful, but they're still, in a way, cheap imitations of the surrender posture, of the surrender posture, or the impulse to surrender. Yes.
I was thinking that the distinction that you made about active and passive plays here for me, where submission to me seems like it is more of a passive act. It has the valence of giving up, whereas surrender seems to be more of a conscious affirming and a active. That surrender always has to be activated, whereas submission you can kind of forget about.
Let me throw in a slightly different perspective, because I'm thinking of, for example, the poetry of my favorite author Ursula Le Guin, and she often talks about surrender in terms of surrendering to the Tao, that is to say, to this both personal and impersonal flow that we experience within ourselves and outside of ourselves. And when we're doing that, we can feel light, and when we're submitting in the way that you're describing, and I like this distinction. I think it's a useful one. We won't feel light. Submission doesn't feel light. Either we're experiencing the power of something else or someone else, or we're imagining that we are powerful because we have submitted to something else or someone else. And that's not light. That's not easy.
So I think it was a researcher by the name of Tybalt who explored the 12 steps of the AA, the Alcoholic Anonymous movement or methodology, who said that in surrender, all of you on all levels, conscious and unconscious, kind of move in the same direction, while in submission, externally, consciously, you express positive attitude, but subconsciously, inwardly, there is a negativity and resistance to the movement, to the external movement. So that's how he distinguished between authentic surrender and submission, which correlates with how you just express it. I find that on a theoretical level, it's a useful and important distinction. On the experiential level, I don't know how it works. I don't know if we can make that distinction so easily. I mean, considering also that we human beings have a profound tendency to mislead. What's the word? Mislead, not mislead.
Mislead ourselves.
Yeah.
Ourselves. Yes.
I mean,
yes.
I'm thinking of the notion that Miranda Kaplan has of conscious discipleship.
Yeah.
And there does, like working with a spiritual teacher, there's a way to engage with the teacher that has a valence of surrender in the sense that we're describing. And there's ways in which people submit to a teacher too. And sometimes it can be the same teacher, and some people are submitting and some people are surrendering. But the surrender is it's a conscious act that one is engaging in, but one is still fully responsible. Whereas with submission, when one engages in submission, one is claiming or affecting that they aren't responsible.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, again, we can make that kind of distinction, which is useful and real in retrospect. But well, I can let's just look at two experiences. So my experience of what, especially in my initial period with Andrew Cohen, which I consider to have been in a position of surrender, there was passionate, loving, ecstatic surrender, and a lot of doubt, constantly struggling with doubting him, doubting myself, doubting what was happening, and resisting it and not accepting it. So that's like, on the one hand, an expression. I would think of it as a state of surrender that is not only positive, but also a lot, struggling with that positive movement.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as the opposite example, I watched a documentary about the rise of Nazism in Germany in the 30s, and they interviewed these two women who were in a youth movement at the time, and they told about their experience when Hitler came to visit their town, and they worked for days and nights preparing, the main street for the parade of his arrival. And what an ecstatic, joyful, I mean, they were in tears and their eyes were sparkling as they were describing that incredible experience they had of surrendering to something which now we say was like a horrible, bad event. I think they had less doubt at the time when they were giving their whole to preparing for Hitler's arrival. They struggled with less doubt than I did in my surrender to what was happening for me in the presence of Andrew.
In fact,
So,
they had no doubt, right?
well, maybe I don't know. You know, that was like a long time ago. So time changes to kind of
but that
But
in a way,
of what happened.
well, I mean, the thing here is, and it works in terms of spiritual teachers too. Well, there's an attraction to this pairing of submission and surrender, which is to align yourself with something powerful, and that can be a high. That can be absolutely, it can be a high, and you don't even have to know how to make the distinction between submission and surrender at that moment, it seems to me. So for these women, they were high in a kind of way, not because they thought, oh, thank God Hitler's going to enact this ideology or something like that. They were, they were serving something that they considered to be greater than their own egoic needs, and creating conditions and aligning themselves. And it was a high,
Yes, no doubt.
And same for you when you were, no doubt, as it was for me. I mean, I had this one moment where I decided, well, I mean, in retrospect, and I really appreciate that you brought this up. It's easy to make these distinctions in our experience in retrospect, but I don't know. In the first year that I met my teacher, I decided I was going to. What I now realize, I decided I was going to try to submit myself fully to the work, to the spiritual practice, and I made this gesture of moving my body to a certain place, and and I realized in retrospect, oh, that was just me trying to submit, and at first it felt powerful, and then when nothing happened, it was a big deflation. So, but that wasn't surrender, I can say in retrospect.
Well, it's interesting as you say that. It makes me think submission has a manipulative quality to it. When we submit, we're actually trying to control things.
Yeah, I think it's really important to try to experientially make the distinction between the experience of surrender and submission.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that people can make that distinction in real time as they are experiencing it, and avoid bad situations.
So
Well, bravo if your Living Transcendence project
yeah.
enables even one person to be able to do that better. That's really
Yes.